Alright, YouTube, it's time for the occult literature video number 85. The big 85 here, although there's still one missing. I'm going to fill that in with Spirits of the Garden because I hadn't made a video on it yet. I realized I had never made an occult literature video for The Occult Nature of God, which is a booklet that I wrote. I did one for Categorizing the Occult, which was sort of its twin, and I actually looked back through the occult playlist twice. I didn't see it there. I'm like, well, I don't know how exactly it skipped my mind when I was putting this together in the first place with some of these older works I had already done. But it's fortuitous because I have released a new edition of both of these works, and so there are a link in the descriptions to both, Categorizing the Occult and Occult Nature of God. The old Categorizing the Occult video that I made, I think it was like the third or fourth video in the playlist. I've updated the link there. I've got to do the same on my blog and so forth. And then retire the old titles because they aren't in the same format. It's the old format that I used. It didn't have a header, for one thing. Really bothers me. I know you don't technically have to, but I just like it. It makes the book look better. It's in the wrong trim. I think it was 6 by 9 at the time. Just horrible compared to what I'm releasing now in the new format. So I've updated that. And I'm working on Occult Memetics. I'm half done with that, and that'll be in the same general style, similar length and so forth. Similar sort of monographic content of these works. The Occult Nature of God was meant to be a logical exercise, specifically looking at the type of deities that could exist if you assumed the presence or absence of a deity, the existence or non-existence of eternal punishment from the philosophical perspective of whether it's moral or not specifically, and then the existence or absence of free will, whether or not existence is deterministic. I came up with 8 general archetypes of divinity that could possibly be real. Now, there are also side arguments to this, and I list some of them. As far as what could exist outside of that spectrum. For instance, reality is actually an AI program, it's all illusion, and so this argument is totally meaningless, or something along those lines. There are some other objections that people could theoretically have as well. The illusory universe and so forth, that's just one of them. And what I got were things like non-deterministic atheism, deterministic atheism, the divine ordering mechanism, that is something that doesn't have volition, but yet there's still order, somehow in a deterministic sort of mechanical sense, or the absence thereof. Some of these possible deities are more tyrannical, some are more benevolent, and so forth. And so I just went through and I described essentially what, if you fixed for these 3 variables within a logical framework, you ended up with 8 possibilities. And then the objections aside that I went through too. I was quite proud of the work, actually. It's logically coherent. I did study logic when I was in college. Got above a 100 in that course. I don't know how I accomplished that. I honestly don't know how their grading system worked on that one. I got like a 104 in it. I was like, okay, that makes sense. I think it's because I did all the questions properly and then there were like bonus questions or something. I don't know. But it was a fun class, I will say that. It was interesting to learn. I was glad that it wasn't just logic in the sense some people think of it like, oh, is this a reasonable argument? And it went a little bit more into mundane mathematics, really, that you have to understand. It was a good course. And so this is primarily a logical work, but it's also an occult work. I believe that human logic is a good way of understanding existence, a good way of understanding the divine and the spiritual. I happen, for instance, to be apatheistic. I don't honestly care which of these deities exists, if any. I don't think about it that much. Because if a deity exists, nothing I can do about it. It exists, and that's that. If there's no deity, I can't do anything about that. I can't magically spawn a deity, potentially. And then I have to hope for like reincarnation or something, or I just stop existing. That's okay with me, I guess, too. So I don't really care necessarily about the absolutist arguments that could be made from such a logical framework. I was simply interested in delineating specifically what that framework was and creating these sort of 8 archetypal categories of what sort of divinity could be created. Now, as to categorizing the occult, it was originally provisionally entitled Internal and External Magic. Because what I did is I delved into what specific sort of major schools of thought, like, or concepts, invocation, mantras, demonolatry, and so forth. I arranged them all according to whether the adherents thereof in various manners, primarily considered the source of the occult energy used, or the occult force, or cosmic force, or whatever you want to term it, came from within, like telekinesis. Most people who proclaim a belief in it, they believe it's the human mind manipulating reality around them. They don't say that it comes from an external source, although there are exceptions, and I list some of them. As to something like prayer, you're calling upon a source that's external to yourself. You're calling upon a deity or some sort of force it's not from within you. You don't have any control. You're asking it for help, essentially. And so I go on to delineate some of these practices, talk about their cultures, the background of their use, the basics of their use. For instance, I took Tai Chi for years. Tai Chi is essentially overlapped with meditation. It's a mostly internal practice, and I speak at some degree of length about it. And these works are respectively 60 and 66 pages, if I remember correctly. So they're short booklets, but they're coherent enough. They're long enough to cover these topics in some degree of depth. I happen to like shorter monographic works as opposed to compilations of material. That's why I'm releasing them essentially as a set. Part 3 will be the occult basis of ASMR, Spirits of the Garden, which covered sort of the psychotropic, psychonautic side of the occult. Part 4 is occult basis of ASMR, which is my own study of the concept. And then Part 5 is occult memetics, and I believe there will be a couple more of these short works coming over time. Maybe have 7 or 8 parts total over the next couple of years, just adding to the bulk of my own occult literature to set myself apart from people who just edit, because most of the releases that I've made have been just edited works. They're other people's works, I'm releasing edition of them, and so forth. I may be translating something here and there, I may be doing some illustrating, but ultimately I'm an editor. But I like to write my own works as well. There will be more parts to Sickness and Hell, there will be a number 2 of Morbid Stories, and so on forth. I'm interested in doing this for my own edification. Sickness and Hell right now is still like one of the top 5 sellers at the moment. It's actually astronomical as far as how many copies are sold compared to what I expected to sell. I'm very happy about that, by the way. In fact, I picked up, for the first time, I've got a copy of one of my own works. I'll make a quick video about this later. It's pretty good, honestly, in its format. It's a lot better than I expected. I expected it to be all fucked up or something like that, and it's actually not. So I'm glad to finally hold a book that I myself wrote. But I'll speak about that in a later video. So as before, link in the description if you'd like to purchase either of these works. Again, I've actually decreased the cost of these. They're in a different format. In the 6x9, I think they cost more for some arcane reason for a shorter page size. If it's more pages and you increase the trim size, it lowers the cost. But if it's fewer pages, if you increase the trim size, it increases the cost. I don't know exactly how CreateSpace's and Amazon sort of cost arrangement goes. I don't even fully understand it at this point. But it's interesting anyway. So these works do come recommended. If you're into the occult, these are works that I myself have written. They're not editions that I've released of somebody else's work. And so therefore, obviously, in a biased manner, I highly recommend them. Second link, of course, as always, to my books blog. I have released other works. These 2 listings will be present in the My Works segment off to the right-hand side. That's about all. Peace out.